Good morning, my friends. I am feeling a little under the weather, so we're going to read with some sniffles. Today, we're going back to the Lewis and Clark expedition, and we're going to read chapter 5, and it is called Tracking the Missouri to its Lair. As the streamliner speeds west today, all the grand sights of the wide open spaces have names which thrill and interest us. Behind each name is a story, and very often it is a story of the America long ago. The train rumbles over a steel bridge, and we peer into the railroad folder to learn the name of the river we have crossed. The brightly painted chain of cars twists like a serpent up a narrow pass, and the conductor knows the name of this gorge the train is following. From the snowy white tables in the dining car, with their silver sugar bowls and cream pitchers, we look through wide windows. A lordly mountain peak seems to scrape the clouds. The smiling waiter who makes this run on the train each week tells us the name of the mountain. But in the time of Lewis and Clark, none of the landmarks of the American West had been named. All the rivers except the Missouri were just rushing torrents of water. The Rocky Mountains were mere bumps of ice and stone 3 miles high. The lakes were only lakes, and that was all. The valleys were unknown. Nothing had a name. Much of the naming was just doing what comes naturally. Lewis and Clark camped on a wooded island where they had to fire guns half the night at hungry grizzly bears with glistening silver-tipped fur. So it became White Bear Island. The grizzlies have long since been killed or taken to a zoo, but the name of the island has never changed. Lewis and Clark spied nimble sheep leaping from crag to crag far above the Missouri. The sheep had huge curving horns that nearly formed a circle. No trapeze artist in a circus was ever more graceful than these creatures. The name, Bighorn Sheep, seemed almost to spell itself as Lewis filled another page in his diary. And here's a pretty picture of the bighorn sheep in the mountains. A broad river poured out of the north and joined the Missouri system. Glacial sources gave it a cloudy color. "Looks like something I haven't had to drink since we were in St. Charles more than a year ago," said Ordway. "It looks like milk." "Milk River, it shall be!" exclaimed Lewis, and he wrote rapidly in the thick notebook which was always in his kit bag. It was great fun. Imagine traveling through a land where you could name the mountains and rivers and even the animals just as it struck your fancy. In a very few places, Indian tribes had given a definite name to some favorite lake or teepee grounds. When Charbonneau told them about this, Lewis and Clark let the Indians' names stand. This policy has come down to us throughout the years. It is why so many states and cities now have names of Indian origin. But thousands of places still were left for Lewis and Clark to name. The captains ran through the names of all the members of the expedition, and not even the dead Sergeant Floyd was left out. A river was named for him. The black-skinned York, mighty of muscle, saw his name given to a deep canyon. The infant son strapped to Sacagawea's strong back actually was honored twice. Clark cited a lofty column of lava rock and called it Pompey's Tower, after his own nickname for the baby. But the solemn Lewis always used the real name of the little papoose, so he picked out Baptiste Creek a few miles farther on. A vast tributary of the Missouri was found to be hemmed in by cliffs streaked with canary color. Here, the national pride of the men with French parents came into evidence. They wanted the river to be known as Roche Jaunée. Now we call this foaming stream by its English translation, the Yellowstone. Never did men have such a great chance to please and delight their sweethearts. What girl wouldn't rather have a great river named for her than get roses or chocolate candy? Rivers and mountains were named for blondes and brunettes far away. Meriwether Lewis thought fondly of his dimpled cousin, Maria Wood, in distant Albemarle, Virginia. I'm sorry about that. Although this southern beauty would not learn of it for several years to come, a magnificent stream in the Rocky Mountains was named Maria's River at that instant. Martha's River was the name Clark gave with blushing cheeks to a woodland stream ribbed with roaring rapids. "It's for a certain M.F.," he said. No amount of begging or teasing could get him to tell whose initials these were. "Ask me no questions and I'll tell you no lies," he said with a laugh. Clark also wanted to name a river for the sweetheart of his childhood, Julia Hancock. But with his customary confusion as to names, he called it Judas River instead. Thus the river is known to this day. It surges across the green uplands of Montana, bearing the name of a girl who never really lived. The delight of having one's name added to a geography was almost more than some soldiers could stand. A great gushing hot spring was named for John Potts. "I'm famous! I'll go down in history!" shouted the round and jolly Dutchman. "I'm going to be on the maps." Potts jogged around the camp whistling a lively tune. His short, fat legs moved in polka time. This excitement infected the others. Peter Cruzat broke out his well-worn fiddle. Potts began to call the figures for a spirited square dance. Clark joined in, and Lewis watched with one of his rare grins. Soon all the party was laughing merrily over Potts' happiness because of his new fame. These lighter moments were needed, for the forbidding mountains loomed ever close. The prairie had long since been left behind. The Missouri was slicing through the outlying ramparts of the Rockies. Sheer precipices frowned down on the river. One morning the earth trembled, and the explorers stared in awe at 5 thundering steps in the river, which Lewis named the Great Falls of the Missouri. They caught trout in the spray and ate amidst noise so deafening that they could not hear each other talk. "Like 1,000 cannon all firing at once," shouted Ordway, who had served with Federal troops in the Whiskey Rebellion. Lewis explored the billowing falls. It was the first time white men had known the great river was broken by these curtains of water. Undisturbed by human beings, the region teemed with wildlife. The Americans had entered a kind of no-man's land, midway between the hunting grounds of the Plains Indians and the dwelling place of the mysterious mountain tribes. A grizzly was wounded by Lewis, but the angered beast pursued him into the water, where he was nearly swept into the whirlpool formed by the falls. Later the same day he was chased by a mountain lion, which he described in his notebook as an animal of the tiger kind. Before sundown, Buffalo trampled his knapsack, and he barely escaped being bitten by the biggest rattlesnake he'd ever seen. "All nature seems in league against me," he complained that night to Clark in camp. The portage around the Great Falls was stubborn and agonizing. Wagons had to be built of cottonwood to haul the boats and supplies. Circular sections from logs formed the crude wheels. The men's moccasins were torn to pieces by prickly pear as they shoved the clumsy carts up the steep slopes. Everyone had to take a turn at pushing. Lewis and Clark joined in the task. Only little Pompey, snugly strapped to his mother's back, was spared the ordeal. Scandon, the Newfoundland dog, licked at sore paws. Above the falls, the party once more rowed and paddled on the Missouri. How good it felt to be in the boats again. Rowing did not seem tiresome now, but the river was narrowing. The dark mountains were closing in. Suddenly, the Missouri split into 3 separate rivers. Because they were all equal in size, Lewis could not decide which was the main Missouri. So he gave each of the rivers a new name. One named for Albert Gallatin, the Secretary of the United States Treasury, and the middle fork for James Madison, who was the Secretary of State. The third was named for the illustrious person, Mr. Thomas Jefferson. Which river to follow? In such a situation, Lewis relied on a hunch. He pointed up the rushing torrent he had just named for his great hero. They paddled into the mouth of the Jefferson River. A few days later, Lewis was certain he had made the right choice. Sacagawea, who had been born a Shoshone, pointed excitedly to rounded rocks above loamy red banks. my people, she shouted triumphantly, in some of the few words of English she had learned. Charbonneau explained that the Shoshones had come to this spot to collect crimson clay for war paint. They called the rounded stones the Beaver Head Rocks, for they resembled a crouching beaver. Everyone in the expedition crowded around and listened carefully as Charbonneau talked. The heavy loads of ammunition and food and trade goods could be hauled over these lofty mountains only by horses, and horses had to be gotten from the Shoshones. Lewis and Clark were tracking the Missouri River system to its source. Soon they would have to abandon the canoes as they had left behind the keel boat long before. With each mile, the Jefferson funneled more closely between the cliffs. But how much could the party carry on foot across the Rockies? The remaining supplies weighed at least 4 tons, 8,000 pounds. Yet could the 34 adults haul even 100 pounds apiece up the steep slopes of this rugged region? Dare they part with more than half their equipment? What could they do without? They relied on rifles and ammunition for food, and without beads and mirrors and bolts of cloth, they could trade and make peace with Indians who must dwell on the shores of the Western Ocean. Horses we must have, Lewis said with a grim earnestness. In the dark of the riverside encampment, without horses we shall leave our bones in these mountains. But how much time remained to them? It was only August 10th, still midsummer. Yet the ink in Ordway's quill pen had been frozen when he tried to write in the frosty dawn. This was a bad sign. On the prairie, August had been a month of choking heat, but now they were high in the Rockies. They had to be across the endless ridges before the snow fell. There could be no retreat for them if they were trapped in these terrible canyons by the blizzard of autumn and winter. As he rolled in his blankets that night, Ordway wondered for the first time in many months where their British rivals were. Lewis had told his men that the president wanted them to claim for the United States all the vast area between Louisiana Territory and the mouth of the great river Oregon. These were their secret orders. But would the Americans be there first? What if the Union Jack of Great Britain already waved in salt breezes of that prized and lonely shore? Ordway tossed uneasily on the hard ground, and his dreams were troubled as he thought what this could mean to his beloved country. And with that, we'll continue with chapter 6. I'm sorry for all the fumbling today.